Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. If I could ask folks to take their seats. My mic is working intermittently. I'll try to hold it very still. If you haven't signed in on your way into the room, please do on your way out or sometime later before we leave so that we have your contact information and can keep you in the loop. Thank you all for coming. Good to see so many people here tonight. Couple of housekeeping items for those who haven't been here before. Let me try it this way. We'll see if this is any better. I'll try to turn that one off so we don't get feedback. Restrooms are on the opposite side of this floor, straight ahead of me, and there's a water fountain out there as well. There's water in the back of the room too. We are currently under a severe thunderstorm watch until 10 p.m. I'm a National Weather Service trained storm spotter, so I've got you covered. I will keep an eye on things in the background. I don't think anything will be dangerous for anybody, but it is a non-zero tornado threat, which means there's this little tiny bit of possibility that there's something dangerous. If that happens, when we leave this room, around the left side of the elevators, there's a stairwell. Please take that stairwell to the first floor and stay there unless there's a staff person to take you out of the stairwell into the basement. The basement door there is locked, so we have to go out and back in. Otherwise, the first floor, bottom of the stairwell should be perfectly safe for anything that might happen. Again, I anticipate we'll be able to spend the evening in this room together. If I yell and say go, then go, please. Couple of things I wanted to cover before we start the program. First, we want to extend a very big thank you to Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, or CMAP. CMAP has been a partner for the city of Waukegan on I don't even know how many things, a million different things over the years, and we appreciate all of that support and guidance and partnership always. In particular, on this process, they're funding and supporting our UDO process and leading it, and so that's a great big investment in Waukegan directly, and it's not the first time they've done that for us, so we're very grateful for that. Also, they've brought us Lindsay, as well as other experts along the way, and so that's another separate and additional reason to be grateful. With regard to this Unified Development Ordinance, or UDO process, we started this particular process in 2019 with an application to CMAP for funding for a Unified Development Ordinance. That follows our work on our comprehensive plan, which started back in 2017 and was concluded in 2020. So the typical path is you do a comprehensive plan and then you update your zoning ordinance and zoning map and that type of thing. For us, we had a bunch of different ordinances: our zoning ordinance, our tree preservation and landscape ordinance, our subdivision ordinance, and our sign ordinance, all of which needed updating and all of which impact development when things move forward. So it made sense to us to do a Unified Development Ordinance, which folds all of those documents into one ordinance that's easier to understand, streamlined, clear, and makes things less confusing for the public. It also makes it clearer and more understandable for the staff to implement, for our elected officials to understand and make approvals or denials based on that. So that was really important for us. We applied in 2019. We were approved in 2020, but you may recall there were a few things that happened in 2020 that made life challenging for most of us. So through that process and the whole world going remote and all of that, it got slowed down. So we were approved in 2020, but didn't make CMAP's budget until 2021. And so our process started in January of 2022. And we expect it will finish sometime around the first quarter of 2024. So it's a long process, but there are many steps involved, and CMAP has been taking it methodically and leading us through and guiding us and getting our feedback. So this is part of that. Parking is an important part of the UDO, and so we want to talk specifically about that, and in particular, since that may involve some changes to what we're used to here. If you haven't already signed up on our UDO page under CMAP's website, there are posters around that have a QR code on them. If you scan that QR code, it'll take you directly to that page and you can sign up. And there you can get direct information. You can use the interactive tools. You can get information on things that have happened to date in that process. So that's a great place to get connected to understand this process. Next thing I want to do, since I have some folks in the room who may not know all of them, I want to introduce you to the planning department staff. Everybody's here tonight, and they're a fantastic team. I'm super proud of the team that I've put together for Waukegan, and I think Waukegan is in excellent hands, so I want you to meet all of them. So I'm Noelle Kischer-Lepper. I'm the Director of Planning and Zoning. I wanted also to talk a little bit about everybody's education so that you know that everybody is educated and skilled and knowledgeable, and everybody has experience beyond the education, but I just want you to hear everybody's information. So I have a Bachelor of Arts in Management and Business with a marketing concentration, emphasis in English and Psychology from Barra College, and I have a Master in Public Policy and Administration from a Northwestern University. Kathy Reinhardt is in the back. Kathy, would you wave your hand or stand up or something? Kathy has, thank you. Kathy has a Bachelor of Science in Management Information Systems and a Bachelor of Science in Marketing from University of Wisconsin-Parkside. Let's see if this one works. Isabel Guadarrama. Isabel's in the back by the door taking your autographs on the sign-in sheet. Isabel has a Bachelor of Arts in Growth and Structure of Cities and Environmental Studies from Bryn Mawr College and a Master of Arts in Sustainable Urban Development with specializations in Geographic Information Systems, Urban Design, Software, Brownfield Grants, Sustainable Food Systems, Community Development and Transportation from DePaul University. Yeah, wow is right. Wow for all of them. Tyler Williams, your face. Tyler Williams has a Bachelor of Science in Economics from Illinois State University. Anton has a Bachelor, you can stand up too and let them see your face. A Bachelor of Science in Geography with a minor in Environmental Studies, also from Illinois State University. Sam Green, sorry, Sam, before I go to you, can I just call out Rachel one more time? I apologize. Rachel, would you stand up again? Rachel also serves in the Illinois National Guard. Yeah. Thank you. Sam, sorry. But you get to stay standing. Sam has a Bachelor of Arts in Business Entrepreneurship and a minor in German from the University of Oregon. Now I would like to turn it over to Sam. Thank you.
Thank you, Noelle, for that introduction. As you heard, tonight is the first public meeting of our Unified Development Ordinance. It's a big project we're working on. I feel lucky to be a part of it. A large component of that project regards parking, namely off-street parking reform. Being such a large component, we want to involve the community. We want to hear from you about our proposed changes, how that will affect you. Parking affects our daily lives. It affects how we experience our city, how we spur development, and how we enjoy our town. Today we're going to hear a presentation from an expert on the topic. Lindsay joins us from the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. Lindsay has a focus primarily on equitable transportation and on parking policy. She has managed a variety of community planning projects from an award-winning downtown master plan for Illinois' second largest city to UIC's multimodal transportation plan, as well as local active transportation plans management studies. She developed CMAP's Parking Strategies for Livable Communities, a toolkit designed to help local municipalities to deploy parking management strategies in their downtowns and evaluate local parking challenges. In work at CMAP, Lindsay is co-founder of the Parking Reform Network, a public benefit nonprofit organization with the goal of educating the public about parking policy and assisting others with parking reform. She has served as co-chair of the Chicagoland Complete Streets Coalition and on various local transportation committees. She has presented at numerous local conferences and has been a panel speaker at the American Planning Association National Conference, Railvolution, and the National Shared Use Mobility Summit. Prior to joining CMAP, Lindsay worked at the Federal Highway Administration to promote new technologies and GIS to state departments of transportation. We are very lucky to have her joining us today, so please help me welcome her to the podium.
Doesn't seem, oh, maybe there, it kicked in. Thank you for that introduction, Sam. So I've been with CMAP for 16 years, and prior to coming to CMAP, I read a really captivating 500-page book on parking called The High Cost of Free Parking by Donald Shoup, and that really changed how I saw the work that I do. And I just want to point out that today is Donald Shoup's 85th birthday, and I sent him a message because he's on our advisory board of the Parking Reform Network to say, in honor of your birthday, I'm going to be talking about parking to the city council. So what I want to go over today is really getting a better understanding of the overall impacts of parking and the issues surrounding having too much of it, and then tell you a little bit about the parking strategies for livable communities. The toolkit, it's kind of outdated now, but all of the approaches still apply. I do want to update it. And then a little bit of case studies, tools, and what we've got coming up. So, say the problem, what I'm trying to say is that for most of the last century, planners and engineers have been doing everything they can to try to accommodate cars within our cities, and it hasn't ever really worked. Those efforts have had big impacts on just about every other aspect of our life. So the main way that we accommodate cars within our cities is to provide more space. You add more lanes to your roadways, you add more parking, and all of that space and the parking comes at a higher cost of different things. So when you have to include a parking lot with your development, you have to pay for that. And then the cost of the goods in your store are going to include the cost of that parking lot, even if you don't directly pay for it. And then if you are living in an apartment building that has parking included, whether or not you drive or have a car, you're paying for the parking that is incorporated within it, so it leads to higher costs of rents. And then when you have all this lovely free parking, it encourages people to drive, because most people have a car and are going to go somewhere with it, and if there's parking at every location they're going, it's going to spread everything out and make it harder to walk between your destinations and encourage you to drive more. I love this cartoon because in the last 10 years that I've been working with municipalities and city neighborhoods on parking, I have found that it doesn't matter if I'm in downtown Lisle or Wicker Park in Chicago, the parking issues are the same. Everyone wants to park in front of the popular destination and they don't want to pay for it. So parking that is free or requires you to walk a little is going to have lots of availability. Obviously in the city, people are willing to walk a bit further because there just aren't as many options, and they kind of have that expectation that they're going to have to pay. But as I mentioned, there are those externalities, but then on top of that, just the sheer cost of parking spaces. A single space in a surface lot, and the developers can correct me if my numbers aren't accurate, can run about $5,000 per space. In a structured building of parking, we're talking $40,000 per space. When you're looking at underground parking, it can be $80,000 per space. I know that the parking under the bean was about $100,000 per space. And when they were discussing whether they wanted to have this cloud gate sculpture, they realized that they had to have extra supports under it because it was so heavy, and that was going to take away 2 parking spaces. And there was an actual debate of, is this worth it? Like, do we want to have cloud gate, the bean, or 2 parking spaces? Luckily, the bean won. And then a lot of places we're looking at a really shortage of housing units, or people who can't afford to live in cities where they want to be. And there have been a number of studies that have been done looking at how much having parking included increases your rent. And generally, they've found the average is about $225 a month in what you're paying. And I know when I was just out of grad school looking for a place to live, $225 a month on my rent would have been like, even now, it'd be pretty nice to have that extra money in my pocket. And then, of course, there is the actual space that parking takes up. It obviously depends on what your zoning code says, but there are a lot of places you might find that there's an equal amount of living space as there is parking space. And I hope you can see it's really light. It's this cartoon done by a designer, Alfred Twu, looking at how parking requirements affect the visual and like feel of your city. So if a developer is coming and they're looking at the code, what they can do when there's no parking required, oh, they can take that old building and turn it into something new and be done. Like, great, we got something we can work with. If you have one space per 500 feet, it's gonna change how the building looks. And as you get to higher and higher requirements, you end up with more of the car-focused, drive-through style, where it doesn't pencil out as much to do the development. And a lot of times, you see the developers will just walk away. If that means that they have to put that much into their development, they won't want to. So if you look at aerial imagery of cities, you'll see a lot of places where most of the land is parking. And I'll show you some more of that. And then there's traffic. Congestion irritates all of us. We hate it. So there's this political will behind saying we need more lanes, we need more parking. So as the political will is there to widen the roadway, add more parking, make sure that developers include that parking. And then for a bit, it's easier to park, it's faster to go places. But what ends up happening is that more people start to drive. And then you get back to where you were. And to quote Jeff Tumlin while using his graphic, oh gosh, I don't have the quote exactly in my head, but we are stuck in this, most cities in America are stuck in this death spiral where we are trying to accommodate cars and getting more cars, and we can't get out of it because we can't solve congestion by adding more space for cars, because the traffic is going to be more of an economic problem. So we have no control over congestion if we're not talking about pricing. It's simply an infrastructure, or it's not an infrastructure problem. Congestion is the equilibrium between supply and demand in a growing economy. And I'll get into a little bit more about that, but the more parking you have, the more traffic you have, unless you actually are successful in solving your parking problem by getting rid of everything that people want to see by creating parking lots. So you don't want to go there. I always say that it's a worse problem if you don't have a parking problem than if you do. And of course, we're hearing about climate change every day and different events and the tornado that might be coming tonight. It's not. But there is a big correlation with the amount of space that we are dedicating to asphalt. And this is a graphic, or it was a study done by a Portland State University student, Ryan Martin, showing that 20% of the city of Portland, which we know to be pretty progressive and have lots of bike lanes and transit, 20% is surface parking. And when they lined up the urban heat island effect, it really lined up very well with those large surface lots. And so we know that having this asphalt in our cities is contributing to climate change. And I think a lot of us don't even realize how much of our cities have been converted to parking. So this is a graphic from Norman Garrick from the University of Connecticut. It's downtown Hartford. And he was looking at parking lots in the year 1960 versus the year 2000 and just how much of the downtown is parking. And all of this is a result of our parking requirements. But even back in 1954, from the American Society of Planning Officials, there was this publication saying, we have no idea how many parking spaces should be required for different uses. Will there ever even be a correct answer? And really, it's become these things where there is a document at the Institute of Transportation Engineers that says generally how much parking should be required with each use. But they are typically based on a very small number of studies in remote, isolated suburban locations without the context of the surrounding land being included. And many communities don't do the research and they'll just copy somebody else's. So there's sort of this like cut and paste. It's a lot easier because this UDO process, I'm sure, has been a lot of work, and it can be easier to just borrow if somebody else has already done it. But as I've said before, it is a cyclical process, and if we don't make adjustments and think about parking more holistically, it really can do harms to your downtown. So in this idea of parking for livable communities, I'm going to talk to you about sort of the typical development we've seen in suburban locations from the 50s to the 90s. You have each use with its own parking, and let's just say that a parent is dropping their kid off at school on their way to work, and then they pick up the kid after work, drop them off at the park, and then they run some errands while the kid's playing, go back and get them, and head home. And all of this movement along the arterial creates all of these conflict points. It's the turning movements. Those are places where it's more likely to have crashes. It also increases the amount of driving you have to do. So even if we're not saying that anyone's changing their behavior, if you had more of a mixed-use park once approach, that same parent can drive in, park once, and everyone can walk to their destination, the school, work. The child can cross the street by themselves and go to the playground, and you can grab your groceries and all meet back at the car and head home. And so same amount of use, different configuration leads to only 2 conflict points. It's half the amount of parking, half the land area, 1/4 the arterial trips, 1/6 the arterial turning movements. And for me, the biggest thing here is that this land is twice as productive. It is contributing to your economy more so than just the vacant land for car storage would be. So to that point, this was a study, I think Strong Towns did this, looking at downtown, I believe it's Louisville, Jefferson County. We'll just pretend it's Louisville. So they had 7 really large parking lots, and they looked at the property tax being collected on them and found that combined, these 7 lots are contributing only 1/4 of the property taxes that the one apartment building is contributing to the city. So it's definitely an economic issue. One of the first communities that approached me with their parking problems said that all the residents were saying, we need more parking, there's just not enough parking. And this is an aerial image of that community. And the yellow circle on it has a radius of 1/4 mile, that's about a 5-minute walk. And this is their surface parking. And so I said to them, I don't think it's a supply issue. I don't think the fact is you don't have enough parking. So I really started looking into other communities and how much of their downtown is parking. This is downtown Evanston, just down the rail from here, and that's the amount of parking they have, with the darker spots being parking garages. This is right here, downtown Waukegan, and this is the surface parking that I was able to find here. And this is Wicker Park, where I did the parking study and also where I happen to live now. And this is the amount of parking that is in my neighborhood. And I think a lot of people tend to think that with more development, you need more parking. And my neighborhood it's not extremely, no high rises. I think we do have 1 tall building, but mostly it's 3 flats, single family homes. It's just they're real close together. And we have a population density of, 27,000 people per square mile compared to 3,700 for here in Waukegan. So this is, I like to see things visually. And so this was what I compiled with my data on surface parking. And that top row is looking at a mall. I can't remember which mall I did. And the second column is the building footprints within that square. The third one is your street network. And the fourth column is transit availability, whether it's Pace Bus or Metra or CTA. And then the last column is the number of people, with one pink person for every 10 people. And really what I come to conclude is that Jane Holtz K was correct in the more parking, the less place, the more place, the less parking. And then, as I mentioned before, there's a big component of economics. And if anyone took Econ 101, which is the extent of my economics studying, you would have heard about this concept of supply and demand, where you have your supply curve, your demand curve, and that point where those two lines cross is called the equilibrium. And that is the point where demand can be satisfied by the right price so that suppliers can make a profit and demand can be satisfied. And this is pretty much the case for just about every aspect of our life, whether it's your cell phone bill, your food, or your housing. And in the US, the only instances where we don't use price to balance supply and demand is when it comes to our roads and our parking. Instead, we use time. And so how much time are you willing to spend looking for parking? How much time are you willing to sit in traffic on your commute? And congestion becomes that equilibrium point. So without pricing, we get congestion. And a lot of transportation providers, even some at CMAP, have this mindset that our goal is to solve congestion. But it's an economic problem. We hear about it from everybody, fix this, do that. But as you increase capacity, it will eventually fill up. And we cannot solve congestion if we're not talking about pricing. And I did notice that there are some meters in the downtown area, and that is a strategy to help manage demand so that you don't have cars parked all day long. So the basics espoused by Donald Shoup of Parking Reform 101 are to eliminate parking mandates and forcing developers to provide some generated number of spaces with their development, to price your curbs with a goal of 85% occupancy. So that means that there's about one vacant space per block and one of every 7 spaces. And then take that money that you collect from the meters and put it right back in the blocks where it's collected. And this can be free public Wi-Fi, it can be facade replacement, it could be business development programs, and how you figure that out is completely up to each individual community. So as Sam mentioned, in the pandemic, I did co-found a nonprofit called the Parking Reform Network, who has helped collect a lot of these graphics. And we've been quoted in the Washington Post, New York Times, CNN. And one of our members is Henry Grabar, and he recently published a book called Paved Paradise. I don't remember the subtitle, but it's an excellent book, and we're mentioned in it quite a bit. But like I said, we still look out on windows of our car and we see all the cars around us and we think, there's not enough room here. We need another lane. And I looked very closely at this picture to count how many people were in these cars. And every single one of them could fit in a bus. So it's really about thinking about how people get around. And if they are walking from one location to another, they will be taking up a lot less space on our street. So when you see all the cars, You think everyone's driving. It's really just that cars visually and physically take up a lot of space. And we can't expect our cities to thrive if everyone is driving to every location in a compact, walkable environment. So as I mentioned, some case studies and tools. The Parking Reform Network developed a database of parking lot maps. It's only for cities over a certain population, so Waukegan wouldn't be in it, but you can look through it, and it is all done with OpenStreetMaps, and it's in over 50 US cities, and you can get stats and information on their regulations. And the cities are scored based on how their parking land use compares to other cities of a similar size. So a low score means the city devotes less land to parking, and a high score means that it devotes more land to parking. So we've got on this graphic Arlington, Texas at the bottom and San Francisco at the top. And because our data is all in OpenStreetMaps and it's open source, it has been used by one graphic designer who created these fake national park maps, so modeled after the actual national park maps, but it's national parking lots to show how much of their downtowns are parking. And other people have been using the data to examine their own cities. And this core issue is the zoning code, the UDO, and these are two communities. Buffalo did a UDO where they were one of the first large cities to get rid of parking requirements entirely in their code. And it was a very scary thing to be one of the first to do it. But the results were really interesting, that the majority of new homes permitted after these two cities got rid of parking mandates would have been illegal under the previous code. But at the same time, most buildings still included parking because they know that a lot of their customers are going to drive and they want to be able to satisfy that demand. So for Seattle, they noted that the difference between what would have been built if it had been required to have the same amount of parking as their old zoning code was 31% fewer parking spaces. That's 18,000 spaces, and if I could do the math on the 40,000 times 18,000, I would tell you how much money that is, but I don't have it. We also have created a mandates map. So this is cities that have implemented parking reform. There's a lot more than 46 in our map, but 46 of them have completely eliminated parking requirements. This is a screenshot of the map. At the time we made this presentation, there were a little under 1,500 entries in all 50 states, 7 countries. We do have a few international members. And each link, and I worked hard to put this data together, includes links directly to the code, screenshots of the code, so it's a really great resource if you are a planner looking at what has been done. And you can sort through based on the population size, so everybody says like, well, we're not Seattle, so we want something different. You can just look at the smaller towns that have implemented these changes. So we have some best practices in parking maximums, transportation demand management, things like that. And we have seen a lot of communities taking up and realizing how these parking requirements have negatively impacted their communities and just getting rid of them in the code. So this is a map of US and Canadians, not a map, a chart of US and Canadian cities that have repealed parking mandates by year. So obviously going up. And Fayetteville, Arkansas was a small town that did it early on as well. And what this planner in Fayetteville said was that he had seen so many buildings that were perpetually vacant, unusable, and once that was out, they were quickly purchased, redeveloped, and put into use. I mentioned the idea of if you have meters and you're collecting revenue, you want it to go back into the street where it's collected. And this idea is called parking benefit districts. And the Parking Reform Network has a guide for developing parking benefit districts. And there are also some other publications linked to. And I also mentioned this idea of 85% utilization. If your cost to park is too low, it will be overutilized. If the cost is too high, nobody's going to be parked there. Or if your hours don't go when there is high demand, it will be filled up. This is a snapshot of some of the elements within the Parking Benefits District Guide of just how to go through it. There are a number of case studies of different examples and how they have been done. So we get a lot of questions about the impacts of EV parking and the future of parking. And what I like to think of with the comparison of how it is today and how it is now is today, typically parking is not shared between uses or property owners, and it is required in your local codes, and it's not really flexible based on individual community needs. And we hope that with the EV parking of the future, we would have shared parking with the broader mobility and land use goals, and it would not be required, but rather retrofitted and making sure that you're upgrading the parking that you do have, or if you are including parking, a certain amount should be EV ready, and then have it be flexible so that it can accommodate changes in technology advancements or general needs to your community. Whew, so that is all I have for you today, and this is my contact information, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. Yes?
Where you talked about the parking meters and putting money back into. Oh, that's right. Can I ask you to go to the podium so that it captures your question? Recording.
Should we get?
You can go to the one over there. Like, should we go?
Or you could speak into my lapel.
Oh, sorry. You talked about the parking meters and how you should return it to the block. Well, we don't own our public service here. I mean, our public transportation. So it's a whole separate entity. So us collecting the parking meter money, we don't own the buses and the trains. And, right.
You could put it into things like the benches or improving the stations where people would take transit. Maybe
okay.
you could put
the walkability.
in walkability or sidewalks.
Okay. I guess the picture just had the bus, and that's what.
And there was a cartoon that somebody else made.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we might need you to come up also.
You know, I think I've been involved with parking and planning for a while in the city, and you're talking about perception, preference, and habits. And that's what we have to deal with, probably even more than the actual structure, because we've tried some of the strategies you've talked about with a great deal of backlash. And I guess I'm wondering, do you have some tools and techniques for cities that are interested in this to change perception, change preferences and habits? So that's one question. Yeah.
It is.
Should I turn this one off, maybe?
Orange, hello? This way. Tech issues. So the question was about strategy impact the perception and people's habits and the backlash. And the backlash is real. There's a podcast called The War on Cars, because with changes, the terminology come up. Hello. Yeah, this one's working now. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of backlash with any changes to people's habits, especially if you, I mean, I've heard it is harder to go from free to 10 cents an hour than it is to go from 25 cents an hour to $1 an hour, because taking away something that was free before it really rubs people the wrong way. Some of the strategies for perception in the city of Evanston, one that I recommended was their garages were very underutilized, and they had free parking for the first hour, but people still weren't going there. They want to park right in front of where they're going, even if it's metered. And then they would complain that there was no parking. So they installed a sign that said how many spaces were available in the garage on the outside. And so that helped people. They're driving around looking for parking, and they see a sign, oh, there's 342 spaces. Like, I guess I could turn in here. So that's one visually to remind people what's available. And also, I've seen maps published with walking distance, because some of that perception that you talk about, people are willing to park at the edge of a parking lot in the mall and walk a quarter mile, but they won't park 2 blocks away because it's not in direct sight of where they're going. And so if you have a walking distance map that says, oh, it's only 5 minutes to go from here to here, that might help that perception. And Jamie, if you have any other ideas, let me know. Those are just what's coming to mind.
Thank you. We have a beautiful new lot, and during the day that lot's not used except by library patrons.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. By the way, I support what you're talking about, but when you implement this and you see cities in transition like Waukegan, definitely an urban community, but lots of suburban aspects to it.
Yeah.
What do you find when you have implemented no parking? Is it a chicken or an egg? I guess, is that going to spur development, or do we really need some development action to do this?
Well, I think you are more likely to get development that when you don't have specific mandated parking. But because it is suburban nature, the developers are likely to include parking or to make sure that nearby parking lots can be used for the people coming to their developments. And so I think the early developments will still include parking. Definitely have that consideration. It wouldn't be until you got completely walkable downtown that you would see buildings that don't actually have parking.
Right. Okay.
But it could also be smaller developments that can happen without parking, which are still.
My question is for Noelle and the planning department. Have we had developers who've come to the city and chosen not to do a project here because of the parking requirements? That's a curiosity. Or come over here.
was specifically the parking requirements that made them not invest or follow through on a project, but it's always a cost of the project. So the heavier the requirement, you saw the numbers, and whether they're exactly right on for any project, they're all certainly within the ballpark. So as a general rule, the developer probably knows better what their actual parking requirement is than
We do.
our code that's been there since 1988. So, having an open mind to understanding what the developer thinks the demand and need is for the development makes it more likely that they're willing to invest whatever it takes to do that parking as part of the development.
So
it also means that we likely have less incentives that we need to give to early projects while we're still giving incentives, because it reduces the overall cost of the project.
So in planning and zoning meetings, when we've had, I'm sorry to sidetrack you here and go here, where we have restaurants where based on the number of seats that are in there, there's a certain amount of parking required and all that. If we remove all of that, we're thinking that even small businesses maybe would be more inclined to come into a locale because they don't have to provide that kind of parking.
It's definitely a more business-friendly approach, yeah. But, and then you'd have to look at the hours that your meters are in effect, because I think they end early here. 5.
Hey, so I just have a couple questions. Number one, is kind of sort of touched on earlier, Waukegan downtown here does have an urban feel to it, but very much parts of it are very suburban-ish. And I know a lot of people around here do commute to other cities and surrounding communities. And just, I was wondering if you've ever had any experience, reaching out potentially through like the RTA to better maybe buff up public transit and have better connections to surrounding communities. Because around here, you can, other than the metro, you can get to North Chicago, Zion. You're pretty limited outside, Gurney, outside that area. You're pretty limited where you go.
As far as new rail, I think Metra is so starved for money at the moment. There's that idea of the Star Line. It's probably not going to happen anytime soon. And our most feasible option would be to look to Pace Bus, and I think it's truly an undervalued resource here, because if you've ever taken a Pace Bus, they're like the nicest buses. They have Wi-Fi, and as long as you know the schedule, you can get to a lot of places. So there's a lot of public perception around that and people not wanting to take the bus. But I haven't figured out how to fix that.
Definitely, and I just say I work in Lake Zurich, and I live here in Waukegan, work in Lake Zurich. There's no public transit to get down there.
Yeah.
So
you have
exactly. And the other question I have, I work in logistics. I know, and you were talking about Wicker Park earlier. I actually do delivering. I do beer distribution. So I was in Wicker Park this afternoon delivering. And I know down in, at least in Chicago, they have like designated loading zones and all that, and it actually works. I mean, people always complain about parking down there, but it actually works out pretty well down there. And I was just wondering if you ever have any recommendations on how possibly the city could implement loading zones, things like that, just logistically for businesses and deliveries, things like that, to make it easier for the community.
Yeah, that's an excellent consideration. And when we were working in Wicker Park, we looked at all the loading zones and we found that a lot of the business owners were just parking in them. And it doesn't work if there's no enforcement of the actual business loading. Mm-hmm. And in the loop, they had a lot of loading zones that were also being abused, and they implemented a pilot where they had metered loading zones, which you're not ready for here, but it's just sort of one way of thinking, oh, well, if we charge for it, then it's not being taken over by people just waiting or sitting in their cars. And it's easier for people doing the deliveries if they can pay for it, get it done, and get out. Just being able to find a spot quickly when you're trying to get a product to a location is important. And so if you do you have loading zones here? Some. I guess it would change based on the types of businesses you have. If you end up having a very popular bar that needs to get its kegs refilled all the time, you're going to have a new demand. And so I think you kind of look to that balancing of the price and the type of parking with how full it actually is. So
Definitely. Thank you.
So again, we want to thank you for the presentation, and as well as Jamie for assisting us with the UDO. Before anyone leaves, I want to remind you that we would like you to sign in on the sheet on the table. We will be hanging out here if you have any questions for us. We do have two small activities, one against the wall here. If you have any suggestions on the UDO or parking, if you have some zoning suggestions, we would like to hear them, if you want to point it out on the map. Another thing we have is on the table we have some comment cards. If you want to leave your name, number, or any comment, we can call you back, or for more information we can send you an email. Anything you want, please fill out a card there and then we'll get back to you. But yeah, feel free to catch one of the staff members. I'm sure she will stay here, Lindsay and Jamie, for any additional questions you may have. But thanks for coming.